My name is Sarah Cunningham. I'm here with Capital One Innovation Lab, and today we're going to talk about building your innovation pipeline using Kanban Practices. So, I'm really excited to be here with you all today, and I'd like to know a little bit more about you first before we begin. So, with a show of hands, could you let me know who here would describe your organization as innovative? Oh, come on, more than that, I'm sure. That looks good. Yeah, that feels right. Okay. Those of you who didn't raise your hands, I'm sure it is too. And who here feels like there's still room for improvement in your organization's innovation practice? Good. Yeah, there's always room to get better. I totally agree. Here with you. So about me, my name is Sarah Cunningham. I work at Capital One's Innovation Lab. I've been there for about 3 years. I'm their Agile coach and project manager. I hear it's hard to wear both of those hats, but it's been working okay for me. At Lockheed Martin is where I started my career. So I was there for about 5 years before I joined Capital One. Back in the day, oops, hopefully that pops back up. Here we go. Yes, at Lockheed Martin is where I started. I think that might be happening. Whoops. And I was a program manager there for about 5 years. That was back when doing waterfall was cool. When we all got our PMPs, I think I was like the last one to hit that train. And prior to all of that, I was at Florida State University where I got my MBA. I think I heard a woo for Florida. Thank you. I'm a native Floridian. I grew up about 5 minutes from the beach, so that's a little fun fact about me. So now that you know a little bit about me, here's a little bit of information on Capital One. We are the 10th largest bank in America. We're one of the youngest banks, and we're founder-led, which is pretty unique. We see ourselves as one of the most tech-forward banks. Our CEO likes to say that we are a tech company that just so happens to be in the banking industry, and I think a lot of people would agree with that too. A lot of folks who work there would agree with that. A little bit about labs. So we spend our time looking 3 years out into the future to understand what types of problems our customers are going to be experiencing and how we might use new technology to help solve those problems. So we build prototypes, early stage concepts, and ultimately our goal is to graduate those projects to the broader business areas. So we operate similar to how a corporate incubator would act. Our labs are located in 2 places, so Washington, D.C. and New York City. I'm based in the D.C. office. It's a little bit bigger, but we do have a lot of folks up in New York who we love to work with as well. We're made up of product, tech, and design folks, about 60 people, and we also have an Agile team, which is where I sit. And just a fun fact, this picture up here is my absolute favorite place in our office. It's our library, and I just love to work there and get some good heads down time and focus. A little bit about what we do. I kind of described this before, but we build proof of concepts. We explore user experiences through human-centered design, and then we also work on a lot of personal passion projects. I'll dive more into that. I think this might happen for a while, but it keeps coming back up. So, I don't think so. Yeah. I'll just continue. So, we work on personal passion projects. I'm going to dive into this more later on, but what that means is we get to work on stuff that's 20% time. So like having time that we can spend doing research on topics that we feel are interesting and useful to labs. So I'm working on a podcast right now, an internal podcast, and that's my personal passion project. Some sample projects that we've done in the past. We built the infrastructure to enable machine learning. So our data scientists wanted to experiment with machine learning, but it can be pretty expensive. So we built this infrastructure to cut down on the cost and allow for the compute time that we needed to run some experiments. We also redesigned the credit card. This one's really fun. If you look at the picture in the bottom center, the credit card actually has a curve on one end. It's a prototype that we built, and it was made with many different types of materials. So we wanted to know, are people going to feel a personal connection to a unique card? So this curved card was one of them. So we used walnut, we used a bunch of different woods, we used seashell. It was just a really fun project that actually went out into the wild and real customers got to play with it. Finally, we built a fraud visualization tool. So we helped our fraud teams catch the bad guys faster by connecting accounts and using data visualization to find those connections where previously they weren't really obvious. So, enough about Capital One and me. Let's talk about what we're going to talk about in this presentation. So, first, we're going to talk about why innovation isn't so easy and what are the common mistakes companies make when they're trying to become more innovative. Then we're going to talk about how you can provide a little bit more structure to enable your innovation. Then we'll speak about rituals and how you can use rituals to help you build your innovation backlog. And then finally, we'll end with a wrap-up of some actionable steps that you can take today to help build your innovation backlog. So, without further ado, why is innovation not as easy as we think it should be? Swiss cheese. So, Swiss cheese is great, right? It's wonderful on a Reuben. It's great for fondue. But at Labs, we have a totally different version of what Swiss cheese actually means. And it's a verb. So to Swiss cheese something is basically if someone were to bring you a brand new idea, it's to look at that idea and immediately poke holes into it. We've all been there, right? We're analytical people. That's like our natural reaction is to say, here's all the things that could totally go wrong with your idea, but thanks for sharing it with me. It's not the right time to give that type of feedback for a very early stage idea. And sometimes when this happens, it's really hard to actually grow that idea and nurture it and let it become the thing that it actually would grow into and be wonderful. So I have a list of people I go to when I have a brand new idea. These are my top collaborators. The folks that I know if I share with them an idea, they'll help me think of all the different possibilities that it could be. I also have a list of people who I maybe shouldn't share those early stage ideas with because they're wonderful at critiquing things. So when I have a project that I really need a thorough critical eye on, I go to those people. So my challenge here is when you have an idea, definitely think about which of those people would be best to share it with. Is it something that you want to grow and discover all the different possibilities it could be? Or is it something that you feel could use an extra critical eye to help you take your work to the next level? Second is lacking trust. And to me, lacking trust is like psychological safety. One of the most popular studies on psychological safety was actually done by Google, and it was called Project Aristotle. Has anyone heard of this before? Okay, great. A couple hands in the room. Project Aristotle is really fascinating because Google looked at their data to see if they could figure out what are the top things that lead to a high-performing and successful teams. Like, what is the main predictor? And they found that the single best predictor of a high-performing, successful team is psychological safety and trust. So what that means on teams is that if you're a team that has high psychological safety, you feel comfortable taking risks around your team members. So you feel comfortable bringing up a mistake that you might have made or that the team might have made. You feel comfortable sharing a new, interesting idea. And you know that they're not going to judge you for that or make you feel uncomfortable. But on teams with low psychological safety, they don't feel comfortable enough to bring up their mistakes. And that's a problem because when you don't bring up mistakes, it doesn't allow you to get better and improve. So they're kind of stifled there. But the wonderful thing is there's a couple ways to build trust on your teams, and I'll share some with you that we use at Labs. Since this is a Lean Kanban Agile conference, I'm sure you've all done retrospectives. I find a retrospective to be one of the best ways to increase trust on my teams. And there's a couple things that I do there. In our retrospectives, I ask the typical questions. So what have we been doing well, and what's holding us back? Usually those two questions are enough to get us through like an hour of discussion and action items. But what I'll do is I'll bring a couple thoughts to kick those off and start getting the ball rolling, because I've noticed that it's really hard for people to be the first ones to speak up. So that's one thing I'll do. The second thing I'll do is I'll ask everyone on the team to come prepared with at least 3 things that they can contribute in this meeting. And that's good for 2 reasons. The first reason is it doesn't force people to think on their feet and come up with something just to come up with something. It gives them time to think about what their response actually should be, so we end up getting like much better suggestions and responses there. Another tip that I'd like to suggest is if you're a senior person in the room, it's really great if you can be the first person to ask the question that you think everyone else is failing to ask but really needs to know the answer to. So that really sets the tone and lets people know that you can ask these types of questions. And then finally, I'll say it's really important to just get more comfortable with being vulnerable. It's kind of scary, but generally people will meet you where you're at. So if you share about a time that you struggled with something or a task, typically you'll be met with someone else sharing, sympathizing, and talking about a time that they struggled with something similar. It's really great because it builds that spirit of camaraderie and keeps everyone comfortable with each other. So third, I want to share with you a term I am attempting to coin. I don't know if it's catching fire yet, but I'm calling it afterthought engagement. And this is when you're involving your stakeholders way too late in the process. Stakeholders are really important and key players on projects. And we had a time at our innovation lab when we weren't involving our stakeholders nearly early enough. So we found it extremely hard to transition our projects, which is the key goal of an innovation lab. You want to move those projects into the line of business so they can actually get out into the world and impact your customers. It's a struggle because if you're not involving your stakeholders early enough, what we did was we basically turned our entire lab, whether you're an associate, a manager, or a vice president, we turned everyone into used car salesmen. Nobody wants to do that. Nobody wants to be a used car salesman. We were just running around saying, do you want this cool project I built? Do you want this thing? And it was a project that they hadn't been involved with from the very beginning. So that co-creation is really critical for buy-in, and there's also a ton we can learn from our partners as well. So I challenge you to start bringing them in earlier than you think is necessary, bring them along on the journey. And in our case, that's really helped us, and they've tended to welcome those types of projects with open arms. And finally here, I want to talk about zombie projects. A zombie project is a project that, for whatever reason, has just stagnated. It might be a wonderful idea, but for some reason, it's just not catching the speed and momentum that we had originally anticipated. So I'll do a quick analogy here. Imagine, you can see this picture, it's Game of Thrones. Imagine you're Jon Snow. You're like on a single focus mission to prove that the Night King exists to the world of Westeros. And you're like so focused on your strategy, on your mission, what you're set out to do, that you forget to look up and see what's going on around you. In his case, and in our case, we looked up one day and realized we're surrounded by zombie projects. These projects that have been around forever, but are not actually graduating, are not actually making it to market. I think this is a really common situation. But we found that there are a couple ways to get out of this zombie apocalypse. The first way to do this, oh, am I getting some help? Okay. This must be really annoying. I'm so sorry. I'll just continue, unless you need anything from me. The first way to get out of the zombie apocalypse is to try out a different team. So the curved card project that I had mentioned previously, we tried out 3 different teams on that project. Each team made incremental success on the project. However, not until the final team did we actually get our product to market. So just changing one team member on a project can have a really big impact. It changes team dynamics and everything. Imagine shifting your team 3 times. You get totally different points of view, and what one team did one way, another team might approach in a different way, and it might really make the difference for actually getting a product to go live. All right. So you can't see the screen. Now you can. The recap here. There are 4 common mistakes we talked about. First was Swiss cheesing, poking holes in your new ideas. The second was when teams lack trust and psychological safety. The third was afterthought engagement, when you're not involving your stakeholders early enough. And the final one was zombie projects, when they stagnate, and how to get out of that routine. So, now that we've talked about the common mistakes, let's move on to how you can provide structure to enable your innovation. I've identified 5 ways to do this. I really love structure, and the great thing here is that they align with Kanban practices. Does anyone get excited about structure? Like they feel really comfy about it, and they're like, yes, I know what I'm doing. Cool, I'm not the only one. So we're at a Kanban conference. It goes without saying, you all probably know these. Cliff notes here for Kanban practices that I'm going to align with our structures. Visualizing, limiting your work in progress, managing your flow, making your policies explicit, implementing the feedback loops, and then improving collaboratively and evolving experimentally. So, the first way that we provide structure at Labs is by using a system of record. Has anyone's desk looked like this? Mine definitely has come close. So our challenge at Labs is we've got a ton of people with really great, bright ideas. How do we go about organizing all of these ideas and choosing the ones that are going to add the most value? It's a really hard thing to do. So what we needed was a system of record. And that is basically our single source of where all of our new ideas for projects live. What we use is Confluence. I'm sure many of you have Confluence, but if you haven't heard of it before, it's basically a wiki that allows you to organize your project information. We use it for all of our projects, but also we use it for our new idea submission process. You don't have to fret if you don't have Confluence. You can pretty much use anything, even down to a Word document, though I would definitely advise using something a bit more advanced than that. Also, if you want to get really fancy with your system of record, you can templatize it, and that's what we've done at Labs. So basically, we created a template that as soon as an associate has an idea for a new project, they click a button that says Submit New Idea, and immediately a template pops up where they have to answer at least 6 questions. So they can spend 15 minutes on this, they can spend an hour on this, but what it does is it memorializes that idea so that it doesn't just live on a Post-it note that's eventually going to fade from our memories and literally from the Post-it note. That does happen if you save them for too long. That's how we organize our ideas. Another great benefit of your system of record is that it allows you to track metrics. As soon as someone submits a new idea into our system of record in Confluence, we have a date stamp. I love structure and I also love metrics too. Metrics are wonderful. What I do is I track many different metrics on our innovation practices, but one of those things is idea count. So over 6 months, I can say, oh great, we've had 20 new ideas submitted per month. Maybe that's our target, and that's looking really good. For the last 6 months, maybe we had that. But then maybe in month 7, we only had 5 ideas. So what that means to me is that we need to take action. There's something that we need to do to reinvigorate everyone, to get them thinking about what new potential ideas there are. And there's several ways that we do this and get everyone inspired and back on track to submitting ideas. I'll mention those in a little bit. So the Kanban practice here is really visualizing. You see all of those ideas in one place, so that when you go to make decisions on what are the next new innovative products that we want to have, you have everything in that one place, and it's all filled out so that they're easily comparable to each other. Oop, okay. Pretend you didn't see that. Success criteria. This is another way that we provide structure. So has anyone ever taken an exam in grade school and then not read the instructions and subsequently did really, really bad on the exam? I did this, I think probably more than once, unfortunately. But eventually I learned. So trying to come up with ideas for new projects is kind of like, you can feel kind of like this man here if you don't have any idea of what your success criteria is, right? So if you don't know what your parameter is, what your North Star is, what you're really shooting for, it can be really frustrating on the associate side who's submitting the idea, and it can be really frustrating on the leadership side because they're just not on the same page on what your success is for a great new innovative idea. So there's a couple things that we look at when we're looking at our success criteria. I'll share 4 of them with you. The first one is pretty obvious. So is it right for labs? There's a ton of really smart people at our company. I'm sure there are at yours as well. Why are we best positioned to add the most value on this specific idea? Is there another team who could do it better or maybe has more context? So are we the right team? The second thing we look at is, are we the right company for this? So why Capital One? Why should a bank do this? Third is technical feasibility. Pretty straightforward. Is this something we can actually build? And then finally, we look at, is this something that the user actually wants or needs? And arguably, this is the most important thing, because if you have the right team on the right company building something that actually works, if you're not solving for a user problem and building something that people actually want, there's really no reason to even start. So the Kanban practice here is making your policies explicit, making these success criteria published and letting everyone know what they are. Next up is vocabulary. This may seem really straightforward, and it may seem kind of silly, like who really cares about vocabulary, but in our case, we have 60 people across 15 different projects in 5 different locations, and sometimes it's really hard to get everyone on the same sheet of music. If you're still not buying what I'm saying, think of it this way. If you don't create your own vocabulary, you're going to turn everyone into a little mini Shakespeare here, and they're going to create their own language for talking about projects. And so you're going to end up with some associates saying 2 different words to describe the same thing, or 1 word to describe totally different processes. That can be really confusing. So I'd highly recommend making sure that vocabulary is really explicit and published somewhere. And then when people maybe use the wrong word, just gently remind them that maybe you should try using this one instead. Because if you're not helping and correcting, you're not evolving and making sure everyone's on the same page. We use a lot of different vocabulary that we've identified. But one of the things that I wanted to call out here is we have vocabulary to talk about our product phases. So in each phase of the product, it starts with this discovery, then it goes through concept development, then it goes through product definition, then it goes to build and pilot phase, and finally it goes to graduate. So having those really well-defined processes allows us to align on requirements and milestones for each of those phases, and it lets leadership know what they can expect in each given phase. So the Kanban practice here is making your policies explicit. Again, making sure everyone is aware of this vocabulary, making sure that they're using it correctly. And the next way to provide some structure is using small-scale tests. So, in the words of Notorious B.I.G., more money, more problems. The inverse of that, and really the tagline for small-scale testing, is less money, less problems. So small-scale tests are wonderful for 3 big reasons. The first is that they limit your cost. The second is that they limit your risk. And the third is that they give you the information that you need, the data, to choose your product's direction. So you get to know a little bit more about how people might interact with your product, and therefore you might make some changes. One way that we do small-scale testing at labs is we do pop-ups. So we did a pop-up for that curved card that I mentioned previously. If you haven't done a pop-up before, or you don't know what it is, it's where you take a prototype of something and you share it with a small subset of your customers for a very short period of time. So you get to see how they interact with the product, if they even understand what you're trying to do. When we're so close to things, sometimes we forget that not everyone has come along with us on the journey, so it's good to get a fresh set of eyes. And it also helps us get the data that we need in order to say, if we actually build this thing, will people come? Like, is it worth doing? Is it something that people want? So it's been really helpful for us. And the Kanban practice here that aligns with this one really, I think, is improve collaboratively and evolve experimentally. We do tons of mini experiments. Your pop-up is like your experiment. And we found it really helpful. All right, so this is Tom Cruise from Risky Business. It's not just a man with no pants, I promise. It's really important to invite risk early. Risk management is key and crucial to business. People think that innovative companies act a certain way. They think that we move really fast and we break a lot of stuff. We get that reputation a lot. But the truth is, in reality, in regulated industries, we can't just go breaking things, especially for Capital One. We work in the finance industry. We can't do risky things with our customers' data and privacy. So we bring our risk management team, what we call our risk guides, in really from the very beginning. So in the first couple months of a new product, when we're really just still trying to figure out what the product is going to be, we bring our risk team in and get an assessment of what are the things that they're going to be thinking about a couple months down the road. So we're not surprised. The Kanban practice here, I think, is clearly implementing your feedback loops. So you get that feedback early on and consistently. Our risk team really works with us to assess and call out all the different risks that we might not see that are going to be coming up on our project. So when you're planning your structure, I definitely recommend setting up your risk matrix, figuring out your mitigation plans, and having that cadence of meeting with your risk group consistently. So to recap here, the 5 ways of providing this structure. One was identifying your system of record, then creating your success criteria, make sure everybody knows about it, choosing your vocabulary wisely, creating your small-scale tests, and finally inviting your risk team in to work closely with you from the beginning. Next up, we're going to talk about, and this is the third actually, this is the third section, so we're almost there. These are the rituals that you can use to build your idea backlog. And I've got 4 here. So the first one is yes and. Has anyone heard of yes and? Oh, great. Okay. I think that's like 50%. That's wonderful. Yes and is so great. If you aren't familiar with it, it is the easiest way to quickly agree with someone's idea and then build on it. So, for example, if I said, how about we put some strawberries and bananas on top of our crepes? Someone else in the room might say, oh yeah, yes, and let's add some Nutella on top of that. And then maybe a third person in the room would say, yes, and let's sprinkle some powdered sugar all over top of everything. So as you can see, we took a mediocre idea and built it into something exceptional, at least in my opinion. Crepes with strawberries, bananas, Nutella, and powdered sugar. I don't know who wouldn't like that. But it's a wonderful way to quickly iterate and improve on ideas. Someone recently told me that yes and is kind of how they see the opposite of no but. And I'm sure all of you are familiar with the no but. You're in a meeting and you propose a new idea and you think it's all great, and then someone says, no, but what if we did this instead? And it's like slightly different than your idea, but pretty much the same thing, and then they all get all the credit for the idea. The yes and is the positive way of doing the no but. It's agreeing with someone and then making that idea even better. And it's more positive, and it fosters that collaboration. Yes and originated in improv comedy, which is kind of interesting because it's used so frequently in business today. But that's why I've got the cast up here of Whose Line Is It Anyway? Because they're like the champs of building on top of a story in order to make it hilarious. So the Kanban practice that I think most closely aligns with this is improving collaboratively and evolving experimentally. This one's showing up a lot here. I think it's because we're an innovation lab and we love to experiment. That's our bread and butter. In terms of other rituals we use, creating a cadence is really important to us. Your cadence is your routine. It's like waking up and brushing your teeth in the morning. It's like going to your daily stand-ups. We have quite a few cadences that we use at labs. One of the first things that we do that I think is really critical to keeping us up and running is we have weekly reviews of all the new ideas for new projects. So our leadership team is so committed to making sure that we look at everyone's ideas for what we could be working on, that we meet for an hour, sometimes half an hour depending on how many ideas we get, but we meet for an hour every week to look at all of those ideas and say, is this something that we should be investing in? Is this something that we should try out and experiment with? And that's really good because associates know that when they submit an idea, they're going to get feedback right away. It's not going to go off into some black box and sit there forever. People are going to know about it. And people are going to look at it and identify if it's something we should do. Another thing that we do in those meetings is that our leadership team will clearly, Perfect. Our leadership team will clearly say, what are the things that we need to change about this idea in order to take it to the next level? So maybe it's not a yes yet, but maybe it's like a keep refining. That's actually our term. We never say no, we say keep refining. And if we say keep refining, we give you details on what are the things that you need to improve upon in order for this to be a thing one day. Another cadence that we use is project reviews. You all probably do project reviews. We do them a little bit differently for early stage and later stage projects. For our early stage projects, we meet once a week with these teams, and they're much more informal of meetings. So no slides are needed, nothing like that. It's more like office hours. Like if you recall back in university or high school, you could go and see your professor and bring up any questions that you might have, places you might be getting stuck. These meetings are run very much like that, and it's wonderful to have a quick touch point on early stage projects because there's so much ambiguity, and it's great to bounce ideas off of people. And if your leadership team is available to talk about ideas like that, it's really, really great to get that bounce back feedback. Now on projects that are more mature, this is definitely too little structure for that. So we like to say for more mature projects, we want to meet with them once a month or at least once a quarter. They need to come prepared with a slide deck or at least something that shows what are the key risks that they're working on right now, like what are the things that are upcoming and bubbling up on this project, what are the milestones that they see in the future, and what requests do you have of the leadership team? Do you need something? Do you need budget? Do you need a connection with someone to help you move on your project? So these are much more formal. And finally, the last thing I'll say here, it's really important to ensure each of these meetings has value. And that everyone walks out of the meeting saying, yes, this was a great use of my time. And I might be preaching to the choir here, but the best way to have an effective meeting is to have a Scrum Master. As a Scrum Master, I can say that was my job. Make sure these meetings are effective, make sure that everyone leaves feeling that there was value added, and that everyone there had a purpose in that meeting. So definitely props to the Scrum Masters. If you don't have them, definitely think about it. The Kanban practice that I want to align with this really is the feedback loops again. So experiment, get feedback. The feedback here is what you're getting when you're submitting new ideas and the feedback you're getting when you're meeting with your leadership teams. And the third ritual that we practice is really fun. So we set aside time to dream and time for innovation. We do this in 3 different ways, probably more than that actually, but I'll only talk about 3. The first way we do that, the most structured way we do that, is through hackathons. This is a picture from our recent hackathon we had about 3 weeks ago. We do that once a quarter and bring everyone in from across labs. So everyone from New York will come to DC, and we'll hack away at really interesting ideas for an entire week. At the end of that week, we come up with prototypes, we share these prototypes, and it seeds our backlog. So we get a ton of new ideas that have been kind of fleshed out over the last week, so that if we actually do make them a full-blown project in the future, there's already been this pre-work and research done, so that a team is not starting from square one. They actually have something to leap off of. Another way we dream and innovate at labs is we have our Future Fridays, which I talked about earlier, where I'm actually working on my personal project was an internal podcast. This is a great way to allow people to work on something and explore something that isn't exactly related to their day-to-day work. So someone can go off and do their AWS certification, or they can research like a new thing they want to learn, or maybe build on a skill that they're lacking in, or just explore something. The only constraint is that it has to be relevant to the work we do at the lab. So I can't go off and take like a class on sourdough bread baking or something, even though that would be great for everybody. But yeah, it has to be related to the work that we do at the labs. And then finally, we do brainstorming sessions. This is pretty standard. People do a lot of brainstorming everywhere. Our criteria for brainstorming is that we have to have at least 3 people in the room, and it has to be someone from each discipline. So we have to have a product person, a tech person, and a design person. And this is great because it gets you really a well-rounded group of people. And what we do in those meetings is we look at known user problems, so things that we know our customers have challenges with. And then we'll also look at like what's the latest in technology and how might we match those things together and come up with some really new ideas that might solve some user problems. Just one example of how we do brainstorming. And then the Kanban practice that relates here is improving collaboratively again and evolving experimentally. And finally, in terms of rituals, this might be one of my favorite things. We celebrate our endings and we celebrate our triumphs. So, like I mentioned earlier, our end goal is to graduate projects into the lines of business. So that's what I mean by graduation. Retirement parties are kind of similar, but it's when we have an idea that we've worked on for a couple months, but we realize it's not actually something that we should be doing. So we sunset it off into the distance and retire that project. It may come back one day when things have changed, or some type of thing has changed, and it may feel like the right project later, but for now we sunset it off. And what we do for both of those graduations and retirements is we have each team do a retrospective. This is like a really deep retrospective, everything they've learned over the last months or last years, and then we have them share it out with the rest of labs. So we can all learn from the lessons that they learned over that period of time. There's usually some champagne as well, which is fun. So the Kanban practice here is that feedback loop. This is the long feedback loop. Over the year, everything that we learned, how do we improve on all the lessons that we've learned? And to recap, the rituals were the yes and, building on someone's idea, creating your cadences, dedicating your time for innovation, and celebrating your endings and triumphs. So at the beginning, I promised you some next steps, and here they are. If there's 3 things that you want to do today in order to grow your innovation practice, these are the top things I think you can do. Your first thing would be to designate the place that would store and hold all of these new project ideas. Create that container for where those project ideas live, so that then you can look at them and decide whether it's something you should be doing. The second most important thing is determining the success criteria to evaluate those ideas, so everyone knows what the goal is, what they should be shooting for. And finally, setting up your cadences that allow you to generate and review those ideas and have fun. So I just want to close by saying that this is a journey. Innovation is a journey. There's going to be peaks and valleys along that journey, but I wish you all the best in creating your practice of innovation in the future. So thank you, and here for any questions.